I read this book. It's called The Gift of Injury.
Dove right in there. That didn't sound like reading right now. I said, I read this book. Big meathead, read book.
Yeah, I read.
I read book. All right.
Here it goes. I read this book.
Sorry.
All right, this week I read The Gift of Injury. It's by Stuart McGill, who's one of the best back researchers in the world, and Brian Carroll is one of the best powerlifters in the world. I wanted to pull some quotes that I thought were relevant from here and just talk about how I think this applies to training, how I think it applies to CrossFit, how I think it applies to just philosophy of pushing your body. I thought there were some really good nuggets of information in here, and I like talking about other people's ideas as opposed to always talking about my own. The first was, great athletes are not normal. Some have developed a killer instinct that, when trained and tapped into, can unleash a beast on competition days. Others are genetic mutants whose natural build lends itself to greatness in their particular sport. Most of the greats are a combination of both. I think that's relevant because in the fitness market, there's just a lot of talk about you can do anything if you put your mind to it, or if you hire somebody that's smart enough, or you have good enough protocols that you could become anything that you want. And the reality is, the people that we put on top of a pedestal are the 0.0001%. And I think it's just good to hear that from people that are studying those people, or who are those people in general. I think it's a good thing to keep that in perspective, that you might not have the goods that are required for your goal, but it's a good thing to just quest and find out if you are one of those people. All right, next quote. Decide if you want to train fitness or train to be an athlete. Your health and injury rate will depend heavily on the path you choose. Athletes sacrifice a lot more than the average fit person thinks or will ever know. That is a super relevant thing in the current market. I feel like CrossFit, because it's a sport, but it's also a brand that has a bunch of gyms that coach fitness to regular people, has kind of turned into this thing that's very hard to define. And a lot of average people that want to be fit are classifying themselves as athletes. The problem when you start doing that is, if you start pushing your body towards performance, eventually you come up to whatever your limitations are, whether they're hormonal, musculoskeletal, neural, and when you start pushing through your limitations, there's a problem. There's a cost associated with that adaptation. Now, if you choose to do those in the short term, I'm cool with that. But if you don't realize that pushing performance is going to potentially have a negative cost on your health, then I think that we're lying to the people that we're coaching. So as a coach, I always ask people, like, how important is this to you? Or what metrics of health are really important to you that you don't want to push through? It's an important thing to know, not only for yourself, but for your clients. What's an important part of your health that's not willing pushing through, so that you know when the point that you need to pull back or retire or change your goals is. You don't want to keep going into your adaptation currency over and over and over again and undermine your health if the juice isn't worth the squeeze. All right, next quote. Working towards ultimate performance, pushing the envelope for competition, or anything more than just basic health and fitness is an absolute luxury and most certainly is not a right. Mistreating your body and ignoring concepts such as moving well outside of the gym can strip away this luxury very quickly. That kind of goes in line with the previous quote, but I think the most important part in there was mistreating your body and ignoring concepts such as moving well outside of the gym. That was the portion that I thought was really important. A lot of people, they're hell-bent on corrective exercises, whether they're from FMS school or DNS school or PRI school. And I think a lot of people don't realize that no matter how much exercise you do, whether it's 2 hours a day or 6 hours a day, there's so many other hours in a day that your body's adapting to the postures you're holding and to the movement that you're doing and the food that you're doing and the things you're drinking, the things you're putting inside your body, and all of that plays a role in how well you're going to be able to adapt over time. And if you want to push your body and you want to be an athlete, you need to be putting all of the money in the bank, in the recovery bank, so that you can handle more training, which means your lifestyle, your posture, your breathing, and all of that stuff needs to be a primary focus of your training so that you can have the right to push yourself. All right, next quote. I've also come to accept the truth. Being an elite athlete is not healthy. The statistics paint a stark picture. For pro football ballers, every year spent in the NFL takes, on average, 3 years off an individual's overall life expectancy. Many strength athletes die prematurely from heart failure due to the demands of an elevated blood pressure that's placed on the valves. So again, that's just going down the same rabbit hole. It's painting the picture that there's a difference between health and performance. And I think in the sport of CrossFit or in the sport of fitness, if we know that putting the amount of sympathetic stress on your heart and on your nervous system from repeated strength bouts is something that could potentially have negative health consequences, then we need to do everything in our power from a recovery standpoint and from a training standpoint to offset that so that you can have longevity and that you can stay healthy. I knew that my day of reckoning would eventually come and I would have to face the reality that every great athlete's career has a life expectancy of its own and nothing lasts forever. I just thought philosophically that was a cool quote. This is one of the best powerlifters in the world. It's something that he takes pride in. It's something that pays his bills, that helped him build his family, and he knows that there's going to be a time where he has to step away from that quest. And I think having that mind state allows you as an athlete to continue to appreciate the opportunity you have to push your body. It is a very temporary thing. Life is a temporary thing in general, but training at that level is something you can only handle for so many years. And I find that a lot of people take it for granted. They start to develop a whiny, complaining-based attitude instead of feeling grateful that they have the vitality, the motivation, and the vigor to push themselves to that level. And that's something that I think regular people, even if you're not an athlete, should have. They just probably should do it in potentially less frequency throughout the course of their weeks, months, or years of training. All right, so this next group of quotes was what causes pain in athletes. Remember, this book is specifically about a back injury with regards to a power lifter. I think some of the principles I'll talk about apply to shoulder injuries, scapula injuries, wrists, but it's specifically about the spine. So if you hear stuff in the quotes about spine, just know that you could extrapolate these to other injuries. The natural safeguards for self-preservation to avoid injury must be subdued to achieve the maximum exertion required to compete. So that quote is important to me because I think there's a lot of people in the fitness market who are really intelligent movement experts, whether they're physical therapists, movement coaches, chiropractors, and I feel like they provide this false hope, this narrative that if you do everything that they say, you can continue doing what you're doing and not experience the downside risks to your mechanical system or your hormonal system or whatever else. So that happens even in the functional medical world. They see these hormonal profiles that come from training and they say, oh, we could fix this, but we're not gonna intervene on the mind state and all the other things that you're doing as an athlete. I think that separation needs to happen at some point. People just need to realize that if you want to be an athlete, there's a cost to it. Just like if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, there's going to be a cost to it. If you want to be a doctor, there's going to be a cost to it. You're going to go through school and you're going to have affected sleep and you're going to have a lot of studying time and a lot of reading and a sitting down posture. Like there's always a cost to the decisions that we make, and the blending of health and performance as a singular thing in the fitness market, I think is causing a lot of people to be unhappy or worried. And I think if people just realize like, oh, this is a consequence of my decisions and my choices to be an athlete, they could potentially enjoy their athletic career for as long as it was and then focus on fixing themselves or finding an optimal balance down the road. Building the spine to bear more load actually requires forcing some microfracturing by training with heavy weights. I've never seen an elite powerlifter who did not have evidence of a history of microfractures in their spines. They are inevitable and part of the adaptation process. So again, this is along the same lines. You basically have to break your back at a low level from deadlifting to be able to reinforce your spine load-bearing capacity to improve. So if anyone out there thinks, well, I could deadlift and keep pushing my maxes up and I can stay pain-free, I think you might not understand what the adaptive process of pushing loads over time is. Now, some people will potentially have just better genetic resilience to this, maybe just more reinforced spines in general or whatever they did when they were younger, and they've had longer training histories to allow these adaptations to take place. But a lot of times I think what people see happen is they get the pain response and then they think there's something wrong and then something needs to be fixed, as opposed to thinking, well, potentially this pain is a response to the training that I just did, and all I have to do is listen to it and recover to the point that it's not there anymore, and then I can impose another stressor to it so that I could have the adaptation process take place so my spine can bear more load over time. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason you'll experience pain in your back. You could have pathological movement, you could have a disease, you could have a lot of other things that cause pain, but some of the pain in the current fitness market where an expert in movement might say, oh, it's unsafe to deadlift, is just a result of you becoming more resilient to bear load in your spine. All right, so here's another quote that's technical about what happens to the spine. Under compressive load, the nucleus gel in the middle core of the disc becomes pressurized. However, when the mobile spine adapted from mobility training has been stretched and bent, the collagen fibers will eventually delaminate under the hydraulic pressure built up in the inner disc. In contrast, a disc subjected to high compressive loads that do not involve bending will get stiffer and resilient to delamination. This is what the strength athlete needs. Most athletes cannot have it both ways, that being a mobile spine that bears high loads. So in the sport of CrossFit or MMA or football, there are going to be times, and potentially a lot of times, where you need to have mobility in your spine. Like if you watch a gymnast go through toes to bar, there is some segmental flexion and extension that's happening in the lumbar spine or in the thoracic spine when people are doing repeated burpees, but they also need a really great ability to stiffen the spine because a 1 rep max might come up in a competition. So if you know that you're involved in a sport that is going to require both of those adaptations, you probably should be aware that it's very difficult to create both of those adaptations, and you're putting yourself at a higher risk, which means your training needs to be more thought out with regards to musculoskeletal stress, especially if you are training in high volumes. So that's just something that you should take into account. You need to evaluate the needs of your sport and understand what types of loads your spine's going to be going under. Next quote. My back pain had, over the years, removed this crucial element from my prep. I had been subconsciously teaching myself poor lifting form, and in the process was only farther damaging my spine on squats and deadlifts as I tried to fight my pain. I had kicked my body into survival mode without realizing it. The crucial element he's referencing in this quote is setting a lifter's wedge, which is basically bracing the spine appropriately for the activity that he's doing. And I find this happens on a regular basis. If people become very mindless in their training, say they get strong enough that a 405-pound deadlift is something that's routine, so they go through their deadlift warm-up at 45 pounds, 135, 225, 315, and they're kind of haphazard about how they lift the barbell up. They're not mindful. They don't set their spine. They don't engage themselves. They find compensations around their pain as opposed to dealing with their pain so that they can do things pain-free. And I think that subconscious process of automating everything and not really taking into consideration what that pain's going to do to your body is one of the major reasons that I see people continuing to have back pain, because they're not willing to step away from what they were doing before and do things properly moving forward. General movement screens are not appropriate for performance. There is no such thing as an ideal assessment for everyone, nor are general assessments or movement screens appropriate for powerlifting. These types of diagnostics can actually lead an athlete down the wrong path and cause further confusion. So this is something that I've seen. I've been to so many movement education courses and seminars, and am creating my own movement course and assessment course. And that's a very difficult concept to get across, that there can be principles of movement, but then when you actually get a client, they have to go through their own independent movement screen that's related to their injury history, their background, what they're doing on a regular basis, their pain pathology, and their sport and chosen mode of activity. And I know there are a ton of people out there that are hell-bent on a specific school of thought with regards to movement. And when they're evaluating movement with that school of thought and then trying to apply it to people that are trying to move in specific ways that are outside of that schools of thought's area of expertise, they cause problems for athletes. And they start to create movement pathologies or movement dysfunctions that potentially make them better, safer movers just in day-to-day activities, but worse at their sport or more likely to get injured in their sport. So it's an important thing, I think, to note that this is one of the best researchers in the world, and he's saying that you can't really use a movement screen to evaluate high-level performers. You have to watch them do their activities. This one's from the powerlifter. My only source of frustration during our first meeting was my realization that there were many flaws in my training and lifestyle that were perfectly avoidable. I've caught myself in a vicious cycle of pain, and my own actions were responsible for my inability to break out. I know this for myself. I struggled with some back injuries for a very long time in my life, and have been trying to help heal people with training after they went through their rehabilitation process and get them back to the point that they could do what they did before. And I found that a lot of people are stuck in these loops of thought and stuck in these ways of approaching training and stuck in these ways of dealing with food that basically inevitably were going to circle them back into the pain response that they were in before. And I think helping people take personal responsibility is an imperative we should have in the fitness industry. I know it's a difficult thing to cultivate a business where people come to you as an expert, but your expertise is giving them the self-empowerment required to get themselves out of pain. And a lot of movement experts do create a reliance on people coming back to them when there's a problem. And I think that's something that I aspire to do, or aspire to create the change in the fitness industry, that people realize that it's their behaviors, their actions, their ways of moving that are causing the problems, so that they can take the responsibility to fix them. Because you only have, a certain amount of time you're going to be able to be with the athlete, or they're going to be able to be with you throughout the course of a week. So if they're reliant on you to get you out of pain, you're basically saying, like, you're screwed and you're going to be in pain because I don't have enough time for you. Unless they're going to pay your entire, they're going to give you $50,000 a year and they're your only client. You're with them 24/7, which is very unrealistic. This follows up that. I would constantly test and seek out my back pain in a convoluted effort to track my progress and say, yep, still there, still hurts. I find that's very common with people who are in pain, that they kind of pick the scab all the time. Like, oh, I'm in pain. Oh, yeah, my shoulder still hurts. And then that creates this negative emotional feedback loop, that they feel the pain, then they feel depressed that they still feel the pain. And then that creates this own cycle of problems in their hormonal profile and in their neurochemistry over time. And it can just be a really bad loop. So I feel like one of the ways that I try to coach people is, hey, if something hurts you, just don't do it for a while. Find the things you can do pain-free and do those. Try to go find somebody that can help you explore the pain in a safe way and can help train around that and enforce ranges of motion so you can expand your movement capacity in that area. But don't just push through pain, because it's going to come back and bite you at some point. this is with regards to some of the previous people he worked with, the bigger picture was never mentioned. The idea that I was causing a lot of my own pain and injury through repeated poor posture and movement patterns, all the while denying my body the healing time it needed. This is just so common. I think people don't realize they focus on their training and good movement in their training, like perfect positions in snatch, in gymnastics. And then when they're just moving around, going and picking things up off the ground, going out to eat, sitting down at the table, down at their desks, they're not focused on where their body is in space. They're consumed in their phones or consumed in their work, and they kind of disconnect from their bodies and only think about moving their bodies when they're training. And again, if there's 24 hours in a day, most people are probably only training for 2 hours. That means that 22 hours of the rest of your day is going to have an impact on your pain signaling, your back pain, your ankle, whatever dysfunction you're dealing with that you have to get better. You have to be aware of it and conscious of it to be able to create a change. I would venture to say that so many people fail to regain their back health due in part to not in part due to lack of knowledge, but perhaps even more sadly, their stubbornness and unwillingness to deviate from their usual training and failing to give themselves permission to heal. That's just pretty straightforward. I think the common thing in the CrossFit world is people want to compete or quote unquote do CrossFit too frequently when they're in pain. And if your body's beat up, sometimes you need to figure out a way to train in a low intensity way that maintains your fitness while giving your body the time it needs to heal so you can get back to doing what you love. Many people would be embarrassed to be seen focusing on core work, air squats, and 12 kilogram kettlebell goblet squats, while others were pushing serious mass around them, but not me. So this is somebody who was a world class, the number one power lifter in the world that got almost crippled with regards to back pain and then came back to be able to train pretty hard. And I think that's a common thing, that people aren't willing to step back to the basics and do things in fitness that they perceive to be remedial. Even simple things like standing single leg balance tests, where you're just standing up with one leg pulled up, arms across your chest, eyes closed. People will be like, oh, well, this is stupid. Let's just snatch, or let's do something that they feel they've earned the right to do. And I feel like the best athletes in the world, or the people that have the most longevity, are willing to constantly revert back to the basics and do the things that make them feel good so that they can earn the right to do the hard stuff. And this goes on to his mind state. I'll be back stronger than ever, ready to smash every doubter and naysayer's face on the platform. I look at pain, at least the relationship that I've cultivated with pain, is that it's a temporary setback on my path. And it's inevitable based on the training that I'm doing, that I'm going to be experiencing. And I need to respect it, but I can't allow it to break me. And I found, not only in my own past, but with a lot of athletes that I work with, they allow the pain to define them and break their mentality so that they don't think they're ever going to be able to do the thing that they want to do. And that's just a very depressing way of thinking about pain or thinking about setbacks. And I think if you think of mechanical pain similarly to emotional pain, or the things that we're going to experience in life in general, if every time something goes wrong, you get defeated and depressed and withdrawn, you're probably setting yourself up for a really difficult life, because life is just chaotic and bad things are going to happen. You can't avoid them. So the better mentality you have at being able to deal with those setbacks, the more likely you will be to be able to achieve your goals. Then the last thing I have here, it's not a quote, it's his weekly split. So one of the best power lifters of all time, day 1, squat, bench, and deadlift. Day 2, off. Day 3, assistance work for the 3 lifts. Day 4, off. Day 5, low intensity bodybuilding. Day 6 and 7, off. 3 days a week of training, all strength training, and some walking that he put in there. And he's one of the strongest people in the world. And I hear so many people talking about how they need volume all the time to get stronger. I need more reps. I need to touch this more. I need more exposure. One of the keys to getting strong for some people is just backing off the amount of work that you're doing on a regular basis so that you could put the intensity required into the strength work that's needed. Now, in the sport of CrossFit, that type of model is probably not going to be beneficial. And if you're a sport athlete, just getting stronger in the squat, bench, and deadlift isn't going to turn you into the athlete that you want to be. But I just wanted to illustrate that you can get so much out of your training if you have the appropriate mind state, recovery profile, warm-ups, cool downs, and approach to training. And it's not always about volume. There's just such a need in the market now to do more. And I feel like if you're doing more and you're not getting the training gains of people who are doing less, by default, your training is less efficient. The best training in my eyes from a theoretical perspective is as many gains as you possibly can get with as little stress as you could possibly get. All right, so these were all the thoughts and the quotes that I thought about the book. I think it's a good read. It's pretty good from an athlete and academic perspective. It's a pretty good blend. Those were the primary takeaways that I had and that I was thinking like, oh, this would be good for my athletes or the people that I work with on a regular basis. It's called The Gift of Injury, Stu McGill, Brian Carroll.
I almost lost my shit.
When?
I posted on Instagram, like, new series, TTT Book Club, coming to YouTube soon. And I was sitting there thinking, like, TTT Book Club? I don't know about that. And then I had the great idea. What if we called it, and this is where I almost lost it, Reading Trainbow.
That would not be a good thing. The Reading Trainbow. Oh, shit.
Take a look in a book at Reading Trainbow.